Greetings to all the viewers. This is Piyush Chaudhary, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Hansraj College, welcoming you all to another lecture on the GE Individual and Society at Hansraj e-Samvaad channel, a digital channel of digital communication by Hansraj College, University of Delhi. As we know, we are in the midst of the ongoing lecture series on the various course contents of the GE Individual and Society. I have discussed several texts from the syllabus. The link will be there in the playlist for you to watch. Today I'll be discussing the poem At the Lahore Karhai by the famous poet Imtiaz Dharker. This poem is part of the unit Living in a Globalized World. In this unit I have already completed a lecture on Toys by Roland Barthes. You can find the link in the description box, and I have also created a playlist for all the various topics that I have been discussing. But this lecture today will focus on the very famous poem At the Lahore Karhai by Imtiaz Dharker. In the previous lecture on Barthes, I told you that this particular unit, Living in a Globalized World, in this unit, the entire unit will be very different from the other units that are there in the syllabus. It would be very different in substance and in subject matter. One of the major reasons for that is that these poems are written, by having a very global order in mind. There are loads of aspects. There are a lot of, wide range of themes, diverse cultures, diverse viewpoints, which are coming together, at one point of time to give rise to a kind of a poem which is very globalized in its immediate context. I was talking about, whatever I talked about right now is, it fits perfectly with Imtiaz Dharker's poetry. In this poem, you'll not be able to guess whether Dharker is writing from the perspective of a Pakistani because she was a Pakistani woman, or is she writing from the perspective of an Indian, or she is writing with the perspective of an Asian, or is she writing as an immigrant in Britain, in England, right? So this is this is the importance of this in this particular unit. Living in a globalized world. So to understand which perspective she is writing is actually difficult to guess here. And that's the beauty of Dharker's poetry. And that is why the unit and the name of the unit is Living in a Globalized World. Literature and globalization, how literature deals with the global order. How literature, describes the global order. How literature deals with cross-cultural social encounters, right? So if you're an Indian, and if you're going to live in, for example, Canada or Britain or America or Australia, or for that matter, of course, anywhere, you would be an immigrant, and you'll carry an immigrant experience with you. You'd be a member of the Indian diaspora. Now, so when I say this because these aspects are there in Dharker's poetry as well. So on this note, let me begin with Dharker's poetry. But before beginning with Dharker's poetry, there is this quote, in the beginning of the introductory part in your syllabus, and I'm going to read this quote and let us try to understand what is being said here. The quote runs like something like this: the poem At the Lahore Karhai examines the cultural patterns that are emerging in the new global situation. Written in a humorous tone, the poem takes a critical but sympathetic look at the nostalgia of immigrants in London for their former life back home. Right? So, obviously, born in Lahore, grew up and completed her education in Britain and Scotland for several years, and then she lived in Mumbai for some time and even married an Indian Hindu man, right? And then currently she's living in England as a public figure. So her poetic range is very diverse. Her cultural range is very diverse, right? And she is talking about the nostalgia of immigrants. This is the one of the major points of discussion in this particular poem At the Lahore Karhai. So her cultural range, ranging from three different nations in fact, two different religions, two totally different cultures, and living in these 2-3 different countries. Born in Lahore, living in India, she stayed in India for some time, and then she lived in Britain and raised up in Britain. So you see this kind of a shift in her poetry as well. Right? So her earlier poems were more interested in interrogating the inner self, right? But this particular poem, that is her, when she was a much more mature poet, then she goes to the landscapes of the self, the metro, and the country, So basically, it's embracing the whole world. The self-interrogation, or rather the self-negotiation in the beginning, has now increased its ambit to expand the outer world. We can say this. Right? So this is exactly what is happening in this particular poem as well. The range in her poetry has expanded visibly and has become more global and I would say interconnected. Hence, she is a characteristic poet whose works exemplify globalization and the vast interconnectedness of diverse cultures, thoughts, and experiences. Right? So, therefore, this poetry, the poetry's inclusion in this unit, living in a globalized world, it's definitely crucial. Right? So, her poetry also ranges, in a wide range of themes, and viewpoints, diverse cultures, religions, diverse food habits, diverse countries, locations. These are all visible in this particular poem. In this poem, you'll also see a wide range of themes and viewpoints, right? Different cultures, countries, locations, religion, food. Food is a very important metaphor in this particular poem, right? So one of the most defining features, I would say, I'll take a minute to describe this, and it's the global appeal of the poem and the diverse range of the poem, right? This is the reason why this has been included in the unit Living in a Globalized World, because this poem charts wide-ranging global cultures and contexts. But before I actually begin with the poetry, let me introduce you to to a critic, Bruce King. In his seminal text, the name of the text is Modern Indian Poetry in English. He says that Dharker's poetry is, and I am quoting him, consciously feminist, consciously political, consciously that of a multiple outsider, someone who knows her own mind rather than someone full of doubt and liberal irony. So this is an excerpt taken from the Modern Indian Poetry in English. So her earlier books of poetry, as I mentioned just a while ago, were more inwards. They were more interested in interrogating the inner self, right? Or in terms of her identity, and then her identity as an immigrant in Britain. However, her book I Speak for the Devil, and this poetry, by the way, is taken from her collection of poems I Speak for the Devil, published in 2001. In this, her poetry journey expands further to embrace the whole world, right? So her scope has increased in this collection, and this poetry is taken from this collection, I Speak for the Devil. So she's talking more about the outer world rather than the inner world in her poetry. So the inwardness of earlier poetry is not visible anymore in this, right? It's a more global, more outward approach that she's taking. So as I mentioned, the range has become more global, more interconnected. So therefore, she's a characteristic poet whose works exemplify globalization and the vast interconnectedness of different cultures, thoughts, and experiences. On this note, let me start with the poem itself. You would realize that the poem is very light-hearted, the tone is very humorous, it's lively, it's warm, it's nostalgic, almost sympathetic, I would say, right? So she's longing for the lost times, right? So let us read the poem, and let's read the very first stanza. It says, "It's a great Sunday. It's a great day Sunday when we pile into the car and set off with a purpose, a pilgrimage across the city, to Wembley, the Lahore Karhai. Lunch service has begun, no beer, we are Muslim, but the morning sun squeezed into juice and yaad na jaye on the 2-in-1. This is the first stanza, right? By the way, this last reference to Yaad Na Jaye, it's a song, it's a song by Muhammad Rafi, right? So it was in the movie Guide. But now, very importantly, you notice that the food is a means to get connected to the past and also to make new connections, especially in Asian societies, right? And food is a means to show association, to show togetherness, because food is one of those things which instantly connects people, right? So food is a means also to get connected to the past, okay, to make new connections, right? Especially in Asian societies. But here, for the poet, what is food? Food is a pilgrimage, okay? It's a pilgrimage, but to where? To their own homelands, their culture. Living in London, if you want to eat your own authentic Indian food, you might visit a local restaurant. And the name of this restaurant is at the Lahore Karhai. This is the title. Lahore Karhai is basically the restaurant that is there in England. The poet, as we know, is an immigrant, and going to an Indian restaurant reminds her of her cultural roots, right? Since Lahore is located far from Britain, the word pilgrimage is used here, right? So we see how, it's a pilgrimage. They are going on a pilgrimage because for them food is pilgrimage, right? So, and also the reference to the song Yaad Na Jaye by Muhammad Rafi, it also refers to an age-old nostalgia, right? Because she cannot forget her past. So that is why they are going to the pilgrimage to Lahore Karhai restaurant to get in touch with their past again, right? So let us go now to the second stanza, and it says, on the Grand Trunk Road, thundering across the Punjab to Amritsar, this would be a dhaba where the truckers pull in, swearing and sweating, full of lust for real food, just like home. So in the second stanza, the poet is basically talking about, those old nostalgic dhabas, those highway restaurants where you have that, charpoys to sit and, you'll be comfortable around. So that old desi nostalgic feel, that the poet is trying to get hold of, but cannot because they are living in a foreign land, in a foreign country, quite far removed from the cultures of their homeland, right? So let us read the next paragraph. She says, hauling our overloaded lives, the extra mile, we are truckers of another kind, looking hopefully years away from Sialkot and Chandigarh for the taste of our mother's hand in the cooking. So we have arrived at this table, the Lahore runaway, the Sindhi refugee with his beautiful wife, who prays each day to Krishna, keeper of her kitchen and her life, the Englishman too young to be flavoured by the Raj, the girls with silky hair carrying the confident air of Bombay. So you see how from Wembley in Britain, he comes to Punjab and Amritsar and all the way to Sialkot, which is in the modern day Pakistan, and talks about the Sindhi refugee, talks about one of the most worshipped gods of the Hindu trinity, and that is Lord Krishna. Then she also talks about the British Raj, and then she talks about the women and the girls of modern cosmopolitan Bombay city. So in the fourth stanza, it shows globalization. The stanza which I just now read, it shows globalization in all its colors. These are all different people situated in different contexts and situations, and also in different cultures. So this was the point that I was trying to make earlier on, that there are wide range of themes and diversified language of Imtiaz Dharker. Now look at the next line, very emphatic lines below, and very powerful and evocative. She says, this winter we have learned to wear our past like summer clothes. So you will notice that suddenly, after the first four stanzas, suddenly, these fast tempo of the previous four stanzas, that becomes, slow. And in the short stanza, she writes about this winter, our past. She says that our past keeps us warm. So there is a sense of seeking refuge in the past memories. Past memories give her warmth, and she therefore wears the past memories like summer clothes. So the tone of the poem here is nostalgic. It is quite evident in this short evocative stanza that we just now read. Let's go forward. She says, yes, a great day, a feast. We soup on the whole family of dishes. The tarka dal is Auntie Hamida, the kadhai gosht is Khala Amina, and the gajar halwa is Appa Rashida. Now what's happening here? And then, she even goes on to say, the warm naan is you. So what's happening here is that she's referring to her family with various dishes, thereby hinting at the cultural and familial ties with food. So there is also this possibility that she's referring to the dishes that these family members love the most, and therefore she's associating them with those desi Indian dishes so popular in Asian culture, particularly in India and Pakistan. And that was a point that I made in the very first stanza, that food is a great means, of sustaining ties. It's a great means of connectivity. So she's able to connect to her roots in England at the Lahore Karhai restaurant, right? So in the first stanza, if you remember, Imtiaz says that on Sunday the family has set out for pilgrimage, not to a religious site, but rather to a local restaurant which offers desi Indian Pakistani style Asian food. So going to that restaurant is sort of a pilgrimage because it allows them to stay connected to their roots. So the food as a metaphor is very important because it allows them to be connected to their culture, right? The food is a metaphor for, say, the interconnectedness of the people, for the closeness of people. Food is perhaps, I would say, in this entire poem, food is perhaps the single most important symbol in this entire poem. Then she goes forward and she says, my hand stops halfway to my mouth, the Sunday light has locked on all of us. The owner's smiling son, the cook at the hot kebabs, Kartar, Rohini, Robert, Aisha, Sangam, I, bound together by the bread we break, sharing out our continent. So here you see the amazing beauty of this particular stanza. Were you able to appreciate it? Did you notice that what she's doing? Firstly, the Sunday light becomes the binding force between the people from such wide global spaces, right? All are basking in the Sunday light in the restaurant. All are bound by the rays of the sun on Sunday, she says. It is the binding force. Nature is the binding force. Neutral beams of the sun which are same everywhere, are the binding glue, the binding force which keeps them all together. And secondly, the important thing that Imtiaz does is, she says that someone from England, someone from India, someone from Pakistan, the owner's smiling son, the cook at the hot kebabs, a Sindhi refugee, Kartar, Rohini, she mentioned so many different names, Aisha, Sangam, of different people coming from different religions, coming from different regions. She's referring to these people in the restaurant named Lahore Karhai. She's saying that these people are there in the restaurant, they are sitting there, and all of them are almost from the same Asian Desi culture and are living in England. Even the cook seems to be of the same nationality, right? Though there is no clarity, but it seems that he must be of the same nationality. So these people are, as Dharker says, bound together by the bread we break. Very beautiful line. By the bread we break, by the roti, sharing out our continent. Bound together by the bread. This means the roti or the food, the bread. This is the point that she's trying to make here. So she's basically saying that there are common cultural Asian ties between them all. They are bound together by the roti, the bread, which they are all eating. All of a sudden, did you not notice that this high tempo, she ends the poem by a couple of lines which says, and the next line she says, these are ways of remembering. Other days we prefer Chinese. So that's the end of the poem. So the high tempo that was going on, all of a sudden she says, these are our ways of remembering. This food is our way of remembering. Other days we may prefer Chinese. So she says that right now it's the Indian food that they are savoring. Other days they might prefer Chinese. So the poem ends with the poet hinting at another distant civilization, hinting at the opening of an acceptance of new distant cultures, new foods, new civilization. So once again, the theme of globalization and cross-cultural encounters, which I was talking about, becomes very important. She says that this was the Indian restaurant. Today they had the Indian food at an Indian restaurant. Next time, next Sunday, when they go for a pilgrimage, they might just go to another Chinese restaurant. So the poet, finally ends the poem on a positive note. It ends with a note of acceptance of new and varied global situations and culture. It ends at the poet hinting at opening up of and her acceptance of new distant cultures and foods and civilizations. Now, one more defining feature of the Lahore Karhai, apart from the food, is the global appeal of the poem, the diverse range of the poem. It charts wide-ranging global cultures, countries and contexts. So even Chinese civilization and food is hinted at the end. Hence, in this way, it represents globalization. So with this, I end the lecture, and I will see you soon in the subsequent lectures on other topics of the syllabus. Hope this lecture helped you understand at the Lahore Karhai. Do pass it on to others. Feel free to raise queries and ask questions in the comment section below. I hope to see you soon in the near future. Have a great learning experience. Thank you. Goodbye. Jai Hind.